and Miriam Makamo says she was once fired from a job because she corrected a boss who mispronounced her name. Is continuous and sustained racism enough of a reason for Māori wards? What do you think of the arguments for and against, please, Paul?
Well, firstly, I don't think Mike Hosking has been racist in what he said, and I think people are drawing a very long bow to infer that he was. And I noticed someone complained about feeling offended by his comments. Well, that's not a reason to censor someone. Yeah. I think that the ultimate measure for these sort of things is what Jeremy Bentham came up with in the very late 18th century. He said that we should test every policy by whether or not it brings the greatest good or greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. And if we look at Maori seats in Parliament, which were instigated in 1867, they've certainly brought around about some very important personalities, Apirana Ngata, Sir Peter Buck, Hone Harawera, and agree or disagree with them, I think most people would have to agree that they've, in a way, enriched what Parliament's been. They've brought a sort of representation of a group that otherwise wouldn't have a voice. So it's worked well nationally, and it may well work very well in the local body level as well. The issue of racism is a complaint, and I know a lot of people feel very strongly about it, race-based seats and so on. But if we turn that around a bit and rename them culture-based seats or representative seats or something, it just stops the mob rule of the majority, and it may be beneficial.
While we've got you here, our panellists, of course, will have views on this, even though Tim's on his phone at the moment, and that's not out of uninterest. He had to answer an urgent text.
No, I'm just checking something I'm going to say next before I say it, so I get it right.
What do the two of you think about what Paul's just said?
I tend to agree. What I was checking on my phone was Maturata. I was to say of those list of names. I was just checking whether he was actually.
Research.
I was checking whether he was in a Maori seat or not.
Oh, he was Northern Maori.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he? That's what I
knew him personally. That dates.
But see, I mean, look at what the Waitangi Tribunal and so forth has developed out of some of his work. So yeah, that's had a huge impact. I'm slightly wary of specific Maori seats. I think there are they're ripe for backlash and create potential problems. But I think what Hoskin maybe didn't either appreciate or didn't maybe get into his views fully was the fact that there are actually, it's not just the law of the land is not just stand and have a crack. The law of the land actually requires local governments to consult with Māori extensively. There are actually quite strong regulations in the Local Government Act that councils have to provide the opportunity for Māori to participate in decision-making. So it actually...
Whether that's a ward or not.
Exactly. There are many ways to do that, but it is actually the law of the land that requires you to do that. It's not actually the law of the land just to say, hey, Mr Māori, if you want to stand, you can stand. We do actually have legal obligations.
Well, as I understand it, one local authority in the Bay of Plenty does have Maori wards in it, but that's the only one. I am actually in favour of the Maori electorates for a rather an odd reason. I think they've proven a great safety valve. Yep. And when we've had, near revolutionary situations over the Foreshore and Seabed Act, all of that explosive force has gone into politics. But I'd also say that Maori are only slowly integrating into our political system. And you have a look at the Maori seats. Now, the average turnout in the general seats, which are predominantly European, is pushing 80%. In the Maori electorates, it's just 50. So I think the fate is very largely in their own hands.
Professor Paul Moon, thank you. And by the way, I'm coming in on the text. I've got enough talk about Chinese fleets and helmets and Tamil bells to fill your next book, Paul.
The Chinese fleet's proven nonsense. Let's put a line through that one straight away.
Before we go, just really quickly, because of
whatever their surnames.
a big power outage in Auckland today, and the digger that stopped Auckland yesterday on the southern motorway, the truckie who didn't know the heavy diggy, he was too tall for the bridge. Michael Barnett talking about charges. Would you like to see charges brought over this because of the immensity of the effect?
No, I'd like to see charges brought because it was careless driving. It had a very bad effect, but it's no more than that.
You can't count out the millions lost on one company, but yes, the charges are appropriate for them.
Mike Williams, Tim Watkin, thank you very much, gentlemen. And Checkpoint with John Campbell on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, lots of heat, but how much light? We're in Parliament as the Panama Papers are dropped on Wellington. Lots of figures, but what do they really tell us about whether or not the property market is being driven up by foreign buyers? The Pākehā Mayor of New Plymouth talks about racism, using it, experiencing it, and what he's beginning to understand about attitudes towards Māori. Dame Anne Salmon calls for a Waterways Commission. We hear more about that and just how ugly will it get. Our US correspondent on the presidential election, all of that and much more in the next 89 minutes. Very busy program tonight, but first, as always, Katrina Batten with the RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. Only 3% of all property sold in the first 3 months of this year was bought by people living overseas. Under legislation that took effect last October, overseas buyers of property are required to have an IRD number, and Land Information New Zealand, LINZ, has today revealed how many have registered. Eric Frickberg reports.
Of the 3%, the largest number came from China, followed closely by Australia, with Britain in third place. The 3% for all New Zealand compares with 4% for Auckland. The information gives a clue about foreign ownership, but LINZ concedes it's only a partial answer, as the 3% could include New Zealanders living abroad. Trust companies and businesses, which represent more than 10% of total sales, have also been removed from the data because identifying the citizenship or residency status of the people behind them proved too hard. This is Eric Frickberg.
The Prime Minister has hit back at criticism of his legal advisor Ken Whitney's connection to the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. The Panama Papers show that a trust, of which Mr Whitney was a director, owned 2 Mossack Fonseca companies registered in the British Virgin Islands. Mr Key says he doesn't consider that a connection, and he doesn't think New Zealanders would have concerns about such tenuous associations.
When it comes to tenuous links with people, by the way, Greenpeace International turns out to be one of the beneficiaries of one of the trusts listed. So before we get into incrimination by insinuation, I think people should go and have a look at that database, make sure they understand it carefully, and make sure they understand what's happening in New Zealand.
John Key says an initial scan by Inland Revenue has found fewer than 200 New Zealand trusts have links to Mossack Fonseca, and they've all been disclosed to the department. He says the IRD has gone through the leaked papers as best it can. The Labour Party says legislation enacting the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is missing crucial Treasury analysis. The bill introduced to Parliament this afternoon makes changes to several acts, such as extending copyright terms. Labour's trade spokesperson David Clark says it does not include Treasury's regulatory impact statement, and that indicates the legislation has been rushed.
Treasury says that further work is needed with stakeholders to ensure the proposals are workable and that unintended consequences don't result. That is a pretty serious concern. If the Treasury is worried that the legislation being introduced to Parliament is not even workable potentially, we've got a serious issue here.
David Clark says the bill has been introduced 3 weeks sooner than the government planned, so it can pass it by the end of the year. An Auckland Council committee wants the council to have the power to spot fine beggars found misbehaving in the city's streets. Figures show that over the past 6 months, there's been an average of 466 incidents a month in which beggars have breached the public safety and nuisance bylaw. 2 beggars alone have committed almost 400 breaches in the past 2 years. The Council's Regulatory and Bylaw Committee today proposed 4 options, including asking the government for the power to fine beggars. One councillor, George Wood, says instant infringement notices would be a better, quicker alternative to having to go through the courts. An Ashburton High School student says cancelling the school's after-ball party is disappointing, but not surprising. For almost 2 decades, the Ashburton Community Alcohol and Drug Service has run after-parties for Ashburton and Mount Hutt College senior students. But now it's pulled the plug, fearing prosecution after a Napier man was charged with holding an unlicensed event when a party he advertised on Facebook denigrated into a brawl. Ashburton College's head girl, Gemma Duncan, says previous parties were well attended, supervised and uneventful.
We have this organised area that's got all the students in one place, looked after, and I understand parents would be so concerned that they don't know exactly, whereas here they know that everyone's in one place and there's supervision, and it's just, it's disappointing.
Gemma Duncan says students wanting to organise anything after the ball have been told to talk to the police. In sports, Sir Graham Henry is joining the troubled Warriors National Rugby League franchise over the next month, providing support for the club's squad and football department. Henry, who coached the All Blacks to their 2011 Rugby World Cup win, will act as a mentor to coach Andrew McFadden. 6 players were temporarily suspended from playing in the NRL 2 weeks ago after they admitted taking a combination of medication and energy drinks on a night out, following the team's big defeat by the Melbourne Storm. Meanwhile, Adam Blair has made an early guilty plea for chicken winging his Broncos teammate Sam Thaiday in last weekend's test between the Kiwis and Kangaroos. The Kiwis prop will miss 1 week of the NRL. Making the switch from laser to fin class has paid dividends for New Zealand sailor Josh Jr., although it hasn't been easy. Junior and laser sailor Sam Meach have been added to the New Zealand Olympics team, bringing the sailing team total to 12 after the initial group was named in March. 26-year-old Junior missed out on selection for the London Olympics when he was competing in the laser, so he decided to move up a class in the hope of reaching Rio.
I had to put on about 15 or 20 kilos. You know, that's probably the biggest difference, and then you just have to learn how to sail the boat. So putting on the weight was the hardest part, but for me it wasn't too hard because I was already too big for the other class, so it was a natural progression for me to move into this.
Josh Jr., and that's the news.
Digging for dirt.
It's a grubby little business, a grubby little industry that we simply should not be part of.
Dodging the digger.
It was chaos because the motorway was jammed, and then of course the rat running starts.
Ditching the afterballs.
They are just really, really disappointed and sad and angry.
Delving into the news, Guyan Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Edith Schläfer on her movement to get women fighting against violent extremism. And after 10, the autism expert who underwent a radical brain therapy for his own condition, which had dramatic, unforeseen effects on his relationships and life. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service to midnight tomorrow. There's a severe weather warning and it's in force for many areas for northwest gales and heavy rain. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered rain developing in Northland tonight, then spreading south tomorrow morning, becoming widespread later. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud with scattered rain developing from Whanganui southwards tomorrow evening and elsewhere later. Waikato to Taranaki, also Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country, Kapiti and Wellington. Mostly cloudy, drizzle developing tonight or overnight, turning to rain by tomorrow evening, possibly heavy, especially about the ranges. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy, rain tomorrow, heavy in Bulla and northwest Nelson. Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy, scattered rain at times, but remaining mostly dry about the coast and plains of Canterbury, gale or severe gale northwesterlies. And for the Chatham Islands, long fine spells, the place to be. It is 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We're going to begin tonight in Parliament, where there have been loud and angry exchanges as opposition parties tried to attack the Prime Minister over the latest revelations to emerge from the Panama Papers. The papers show most of the lawyers who lobbied the Revenue Minister in 2014 against shutting down the foreign trust industry had extensive links with Mossack Fonseca. They also show the man who handles the Prime Minister's personal legal matters, Ken Whitney, we've heard that name a lot lately, had links to 2 Mossack Fonseca companies. Mr Key also says IRD has found fewer than 200 New Zealand trusts in the database made public today, all of which have been declared, but in a later statement he acknowledged that that is just an initial scan. All of this unfolding today. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Mr Key recently said he'd been assured by Mr Whitney he had no links to Mossack Fonseca. The papers show Mr Whitney has connections to 2 Mossack Fonseca companies registered in the British Virgin Islands through his directorship of the Rothschild Trust New Zealand. The Labour leader Andrew Little asked Mr Key how that reconciled with those assurances.
With today's revelations that show Mr Whitney has had dealings with that firm.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Firstly, I have no responsibility for Mr Whitney or any other New Zealander. But Mr Speaker, I stand by the statements that I've made in relation to Mr Whitney, and I think incrimination by insinuation could be a very dangerous game because, Mr Speaker, I took a moment just to look in the database and guess who's a beneficiary of one of the trusts? Oh, Greenpeace International. And guess who else is mentioned? Amnesty International. Order!
Mr Little also asked Mr Key about the business links of the lawyers who lobbied the Revenue Minister in 2014.
Does he see any issue with the people lobbying the IRD to protect foreign trusts having connections to Mossack Fonseca?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Firstly, you reject the last part of it, but I don't see any issue with a lobby group speaking to the government. In fact, I'm sure that the education sector and teachers speak to the Education Minister. I'm sure those who are interested in health and safety speak to the workplace. I'm sure the CTU talk to the Labor Party. Mr Speaker, here's breaking news. People who work in an industry might actually want to talk to the government about it. If you're going to hang them for that, there's going to be a lot of hangings taking place.
Mr Key was also questioned about a 2010 law change.
Did he personally push through the zero rating of tax on foreign funds in 2010 over the objection of officials from the Ministry of Economic Development? Or put another way, does he recall saying, quotes, "I've told Jerry to deliver me a paper that has zero rating of funds"?
Mr. Right
Honourable Prime Minister. Point of order.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand has barely featured in the international Panama Papers coverage, which was challenged by the Greens co-leader James Shaw.
When more than 40 different international outlets from around the world, including USA Today, The Independent, The Telegraph, The Washington Times, The Australian, The AFT, The Age, The Sydney Morning Herald, The Guardian, have reported on New Zealand's role in the Panama Papers.
Speaker.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes, I stand very much by the view. If you look at the international reporting of this, New Zealand has been but a footnote. A single mention of New Zealand is not actually what's leading the news.
Mr Key provoked abuse from around the House when he outed a Green MP as having a foreign trust, as reported a few weeks ago by RNZ, and relating to a trust in the UK that gives her wider family access to a holiday home.
Firstly, there can be quite legitimate reasons why people have a foreign trust. I suggest the member leave the House and ring Greenpeace, Amnesty and Red Cross, because they are implicated in the papers. But more importantly that, just turn around and ask his colleague. Mojo Mathers has a foreign trust.
Supplementary.
Order.
The international organisations Greenpeace, Amnesty and Red Cross do all feature in the Panama Papers linked to fundraising trusts. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
30 minutes past 5. The first ever data suggesting how many foreigners are buying New Zealand property has been released and offers what appears to be a somewhat confusing picture, perhaps suggesting the number could be as low as 3%. Since October, overseas buyers of residential investment properties have required a New Zealand bank account and an IRD number. At the time, the government said it was mainly to check that people were paying the right tax, but it also said it could use the data to inform its housing policy. And today, Land Information has revealed the first tranche of numbers. We're going to discuss this with Bernard Hickey in a moment, but first, Alex Ashton looks at the numbers themselves.
Land Information made it clear this afternoon the data they were about to release was not a foreign ownership register. The Chief Executive of Land Information, Peter Mercy, says the changes in October, like the requirement for IRD numbers and bank accounts, were predominantly to check people were meeting their tax obligations.
At the same time, we took the opportunity to include some questions to look at people's affiliation to New Zealand when they are doing a land transfer.
The data covers from the 1st of January until the end of March, one financial quarter.
So it's looking at the transfers from the buyer's side, essentially of about 45,000 property transfers in that quarter. For 3% of those transfers, at least one of the parties associated with being a buyer had an overseas tax residency.
The fact the data is based on tax residency is important because it doesn't actually indicate nationality. For example, a New Zealander working in London could have tax residency there, but is still a resident of New Zealand. Mr Mercy calls the data on overseas buyers conservative. Here's why.
If you have 4 people purchasing or doing a property transaction, 3 of them might be New Zealand tax residents, 1 might be, for example, Australian, we would capture that as in the breakout, the 3%.
Of the rest of the buyers, half had New Zealand tax residency and 37% didn't have to disclose information because it was their main home. The other 10% were excluded because people who had bought or sold property before October were exempt. That's for buying, but Mr Mercy says selling told a similar story.
In this case, we've got 2% of transfers where at least one seller held an overseas tax residence, 55% only gave a New Zealand tax residency, and 31% gave their main home, claimed a main home exemption.
Just over a quarter of the transfers were in Auckland alone. There, about 4% of buyers had overseas tax residency. The Minister for Land Information, Louise Upston, admits the data on overseas buyers and sellers is limited, largely because some people have misinterpreted the questions.
So we want to look at what corrections to make for future, so that in future quarters we can have a better picture, because this second part is the information that's useful for potentially us looking at housing policy in the future.
Land Information didn't release the data it collected from October through till the end of last year, when it first implemented the change. That's because about half of all property transfers in that 3-month period were exempt from disclosing their tax residency status. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
So are these figures useful, revealing or illuminating in any way at all? To discuss that, we're joined now by Bernard Hickey, a vastly experienced financial journalist, of course, from Hive News Now, which you can find on hivenews.co.nz. Welcome, Bernard. Lovely to have you out of the Wellington studio with us. Is there anything in these figures that we can grasp onto in a meaningful sort of way?
Well, it's a very sketchy beginning. The 3% number is a start. But you've got to remember there's a whole bunch of things which could mean it's a very underreported figure. For example, 35% of the buyers of homes said they were actually foreign students or had temporary work visas. But as Land Information said, it may well be some of those people were actually New Zealanders who misinterpreted the survey question and thought they should answer it. So they're going to have to redesign that question for a start. So there's 35%, which there is some doubt about. And also about 10% of the transactions were still exempt under the rules which grandfathered transactions that started before the October 1st start of the rule. So 3% is a very sketchy start. It looks like it's an underestimate. And we'll find out in the next 6 to 12 months what the more real number is.
So why will it become more meaningful? Why will there be greater clarity in 6 to 12 months' time? What's going to change?
Well, firstly, the 10% of transactions which are currently exempt because they began before October the 1st, they will drop out of the figures. Secondly, we will get better information on who are the people who say they are New Zealand tax residents, but actually are foreign students or are here on a temporary work visa. So by any usual measure, they wouldn't be counted as New Zealand residents. And currently that number is 35%, which is a pretty chunky thing. So if you actually added up the 3% plus the 35% who say they're students or on temporary work visas, plus the 10% which are currently exempt, you could get a number as high as 48%. Now that, of course, is way out of the ballpark. But somewhere between 3% and 48% is something like the number that it could be.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty broad, isn't it, as a spectrum? When is this going to become meaningful in terms of political responses to it and putting pressure on for more effective political responses?
Yeah, well, Land Information says that they will redesign the survey, particularly around the student part of it, for release for the September quarter. So we'll probably get those figures sometime in October or November. We'll have dropped out the initial exempt data. So by the end of this year sometime, we should have something more useful, and certainly in time for the election next year. And it'll be early next year when the government will be in a position to say, well, here's what this means for housing policy. Should, for example, the government introduce a land tax on non-residents? Potentially they could. Should, for example, there be a debate again about banning foreign buyers of existing homes in New Zealand? Obviously the opposition says that's what they'd like to do. So you're really not going to see proper data until the end of this year, early next year.
Okay. Of course, there's a polarity here, isn't there? On the one hand, the government is saying that this is the supply side. If we resolve the supply side, then the problem will be solved to a certain extent. But these are discussions around the demand side, aren't they? Is this going to be a very big election issue next year, Bernard?
I think it will be the election issue, along with the problems with housing supply in Auckland. You could argue they're two sides of the same coin. The government says that its main drive is to improve housing supply in Auckland, but we know that in the next couple of months there's going to be a huge event, really, in the New Zealand political economy. That's the release of the unitary plan proposal by the independent hearings panel for the Auckland Council. Even today, Bill English told us that that is a key moment for the government. If the council agrees to a unitary plan which has lots of space for new houses, both up and out in Auckland, that takes some of the pressure off the government. But if the council says, no, we don't want intensification or sprawl, then the government has a really tough decision to make. And also the pressure now is really on the Reserve Bank, and we'll find out more about that tomorrow morning.
Yes, we will indeed, and we'll cover that on Checkpoint tomorrow night. Thank you so much, Bernard Hickey from Hive News, which you can find on hivenews.co.nz. Bernard was live out of our Wellington studio. Coming up next on Checkpoint, why outgoing New Plymouth Mayor Andrew Jud says he has been a victim of anti-Māori racism. More on speculation that APN News and Fairfax might merge. This is a very big story in the media world. Environmentalist and academic Dame Anne Salmon calls for a Waterways Commission to take charge of the country's water. The Warriors just named its team for this weekend's game in Christchurch against the Penrith Panthers. Looks like they might have Sir Graham Henry coming off the bench. We're going to look at that. And could the first parcel delivery by drone be just around the corner after the successful 3-month trial of a parcel copter in Bavaria? We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101 and email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Don't forget our Facebook and Twitter pages too. And you might want to use those, any of them, after this next interview. What does it feel like to be the victim of anti-Māori racism, casual racism, explicit racism, even racist abuse every day? Andrew Jud, a Pākehā, thinks he's beginning to have some idea. The Mayor of the New Plymouth District Council has announced he won't seek re-election. The reason, in short, it's the abuse he's received since he began campaigning for greater Māori representation in Taranaki. This was a controversial issue locally, and when the District Council voted to establish a Māori ward, a citizens-initiated referendum saw 83% of the 25,000 votes cast being against the proposal. Things got pointed and personal, and Andrew Judd decided he'd move on. At this stage, TVNZ's 7 Sharp picked up the story, but it was after the story ran that things got hotter still. 7 Sharp host Mike Hosking declared Mayor Judd was, and I quote, completely out of touch with Middle New Zealand. And then the debate went national. But Andrew Judd says the kind of things that were being said about him were very familiar indeed.
Things like, if I'd known you stood for this Māori stuff, I would never have supported or voted for you. You're done, mate. Māori don't need special treatment. They just need to be more like us. You're so misguided, Andrew. You're a one-term fella. You're not a politician. You're an idiot. You're a bigot. You're a separatist. You're supporting apartheid. You've got to drop all this Māori stuff.
Andrew, you sound to me like you're reading this list out. Are you taking
notes? I am reading my book.
Yeah, so you are keeping notes of what people are saying to you. And who are they? So if we look back on those comments that you've just read out to us, what sort of person is saying that sort of thing to you?
I've had comments like that from people that have just stunned me, which is why I've written it. And I don't want to, obviously I wouldn't say names, but people who are elected, and here's a classic of somebody who's elected. The loser must follow the laws of the victor, Andrew.
So when you say elected, are you talking a fellow councillor there?
No, a politician.
Okay, a central government or a local government politician?
Central government.
And what did he or she say?
The loser must follow the laws of the victor.
Okay, of course there was a treaty, wasn't there? So, in fact, actually, that doesn't really acknowledge that at all, the loser-victor kind of attitude, does it?
John, what it's reflecting is actually the question that I'm posing back to New Zealand, and that is, my gosh, have we moved anywhere? Have we? Then of course I'm thinking or saying, actually, and from my own experience, we've never had a proper conversation with each other in terms of Pākehā to Pākehā. It's like we've got this mental wall, and I say that from my own life's experience. I had no idea of any of this because I've never, ever had to walk in a Māori world. I mean, I was 50 when I was elected, and I'd never been on a marae. Yet here I am, the mayor of a province, so rich in Māori culture.
Richard, yeah. I mean, Parihaka is not terribly far away from you. What, 40 minutes drive down the road?
That's right. So I had no idea. I mean, I knew of it as a settlement, but nothing to do with what actually happened, and more importantly, how it all happened. For me, though, that journey, because you probably hear, why didn't he campaign on that sort of this thing? Well, I didn't actually have any idea until because we're going through the process of settlement with Te Atiawa. And that's what started my journey, because I was given some reading information.
Okay, so you started this journey, and since embarking on this journey and going public with your response to the journey, in an odd kind of way, even though you are Pākehā, have you been the victim of anti-Māori racism? Is that effectively what you're saying?
Yes, it's exactly what I'm saying. So I'm not Māori at all, and I've not only come to realise this racism, I've felt it. And I mean, how lucky am I in the sense I can walk away from this job? I don't have to wake up tomorrow as Māori.
People say what? What is the most common argument advanced against what you are saying now?
They need to get off their backsides to stop holding their hands out for special privilege.
And what's your response to that?
Well, some people, it's just so hard to unpack because some have such anger in their voice, and some, you can have start a discussion where there's a bit of sympathy, but it eventually comes to the surface.
Well, people get angry with you?
Oh gosh, absolutely.
And you've been spat at? It's been reported that you were spat at?
Was.
Did that happen?
It did, yeah, early on, and some swearing and stuff. So, and I try not to focus on that actually because, you know, in part that comes with the job. But behind that, I couldn't judge that person truly because I had to say, well, what motivated that? And I understood what motivated that because that's what I used to say and think. Surely you don't, no one should spit, of course, or swear. But the motivation of that anger is where I've come from all my life. All those cliche, ignorant statements I used to have and feel. And I've had to challenge that in myself. So I'm reflecting to people, look, I'm saying I'm a recovering racist because it was purely based on ignorance and arrogance and privilege, actually, because I didn't have to walk in a Māori world. Becoming the mayor, I had to walk in a Māori world because of obviously you're engaging in a wider sense, like first time on a marae. Then I looked into the eyes of real people that these things have real consequences to, who are still in pain from this. And I think here it's been thrown at me in a public forum. How must Māori feel having to watch all this? How would you feel as a person in your own country? And we wonder why we have such challenges. I've come to say, look, you can throw all the money you like at the challenges around settlement. If we haven't actually had an honest conversation with ourselves about the past happenings and our attitude from it, we'll never truly fix it. And it's not to name, shame or blame. It's to actually understand, to have empathy, to have tolerance, to realise that there are two worlds, actually. Māori have to walk in the Pākehā world, but there's no requirement on mainstream New Zealand to do anything Māori, except have this high almighty attitude.
So the people who listen to you say that and say, I'm sick of hearing about bloody Maori, they want special treatment, we're all one people, we're all in this together, it's New Zealand.
That's right.
And do you hear that?
All the time.
All the time. How many times have you heard this? Just ad infinitum.
Every day.
Okay, so what do you say back to them?
So I've got the answers just pretty much to everything thrown at me now. So the classic one is, we're all one now, Judd, get over it. And I say, well, if we're all one, let's all be Māori. Because what you're saying is, what? Whose version of one are you implying we should all be? Because the reality to that is, we have cultural differences. Yes, we're one country, one passport, one rule, one law, but there are differences. To say we're all one is to disregard the minority of the tangata whenua by implying they should be what? As someone said to me, they just got to be more like us. That's the first one that they're throwing at me. The other one, lady comes up in the street and says, you do realise when Māori get settlement, the first thing they do is go down to Michael Hill and buy gold watches. I said, really? Of course they do. And I said, who? So I said, well, who? Well, they all do it. No, local iwi here. Come on, Andrew, don't be silly. They all do that. I said, I've never heard of that. Do you really know that to be factual? Well, where did that come from? Because I think that's come from someone who's planted that thought in you. Because those thoughts were planted in me all of my life based on no actual knowledge.
Okay, Andrew, I want to come in here because we've got a finite amount of time.
Sorry, yes. And I get emotional on that.
It's nice that you give a damn. That's
I get passionate.
Okay, yeah, that's clearly on the record. But there's going to be dual responses to what you're saying. I can imagine that some people who are listening will be just clapping and saying, "What a wonderful man," and other people who are listening will be saying, "What a PC lunatic."
I get all of that.
Yeah. So how do we reconcile those two strands?
So what I've thought, all I can do as one individual is say this. I'm a European, Papua New Zealand. I love my country. I was elected to a mayor of a district. I've come to realise what I didn't know. I'm standing up to say from that lack of knowledge, that held an attitude, I am a recovering racist. It doesn't matter what you think of me, and I no longer ask for your vote. I simply say, look into your heart and ask the questions I asked of myself, because only you can answer that honestly to yourself.
Andrew Jud, the outgoing Mayor of New Plymouth. We'll ask you for your feedback on that in a sec, but we wanted to ask the people of New Plymouth for their feedback. Are they racist? Our reporter Robin Markham took to the streets to find out.
I don't think they're any more racist than any other town. Everybody has their problems, I don't think they're any worse.
Not so much racist, but it is, for me, it is quite white. I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but I have noticed in like schools and things, a lot of the things are very Western rather than Māori.
No, I don't think so. No, I think it's grossly exaggerated, really. I think everyone gets a fair deal here.
No, not at all. I don't think I'd like to comment on that because, I say it privately to my wife, what my thoughts are.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we have our gangs in that, but most towns do. But generally everyone seems to be pretty polite, pretty good to you.
I mean, I come from Waitara, so I know all about the racism, but I suppose you get used to it. Live and learn?
No, definitely not.
I think there's still a lot of conservative people around town that perhaps could or would be perceived as being racist.
No, not at all. In all the 8-9 years I've been here in New Zealand, this is probably one of the places I found to be people are quite friendly. I think it's probably because there's such a cultural diversity here.
So, some vox pops from the streets of New Plymouth. We would love your feedback on Taranaki Mayor Andrew Jud and what he says about racism and the level of it in New Zealand. You can text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We'd love to hear from you. Coming up on Checkpoint, could a merger be on the horizon for APN and Fairfax? The Auckland Council considers fining beggars as one of the options to reducing numbers on the streets. And the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau plans to visit Fort McMurray, a city ravaged by wildfires over the past week. Nona's sitting beside me to discuss business news too, but all of that will be after the headlines with Katrina Batten.
Only 3% of all properties sold in the first 3 months of this year was bought by overseas buyers. The largest number of buyers were from China, followed closely by Australia, with Britain in third place. Land Information New Zealand says these could include New Zealanders living abroad. The figure for Auckland is 4%. The Prime Minister has hit back at criticism of his legal advisor Ken Whitney's connection to the Panama law firm Mossack Fonseca. The Panama Papers show a trust, of which Mr Whitney was a director, owned 2 Mossack Fonseca companies registered in the British Virgin Islands. Mr Key says he doesn't consider that a connection, and New Zealanders wouldn't have concerns about such tenuous associations. The Labour Party says legislation enacting the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is missing crucial Treasury analysis. The bill introduced to Parliament this afternoon makes changes to several acts, such as extending copyright terms. Labour says it does not include Treasury's regulatory impact statement, which indicates the legislation has been rushed. The agency running the controversial Compass contract for Dunedin hospital meals says it's begun monitoring their quality for food safety, patient and staff satisfaction and complaint resolution. There's been a stream of complaints from patients and junior doctors since Compass took over in February. The government agency Health Partnerships says from April, Compass has to report monthly against performance indicators in its contract. Alberta's provincial premier says about 90% of buildings in the Canadian city of Fort McMurray have survived the massive wildfire. More than 80,000 people were evacuated from the oil sands city last week. And a power failure has hit the central Auckland suburbs of Green Lane and Remuera. Auckland Transport is warning peak hour motorists to take care with traffic lights in the area out of action. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now. Nona Peltier sitting beside me. Retailer group Briscoes and honey and natural food company Comvita.
Yeah,
both reported today.
That's right.
It's a funny old world we live in, where the word food has to be preceded by the word natural.
It's sort of a funny thing.
Yeah, well,
maybe we should. Well,
yeah.
I guess we could just say a food company, but it's not like traditional food.
No.
It's more like, I think that kind of conjures up the image of sort of healthy,
yeah.
sort of specialised food groups, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Hit me with them. How did they go?
Well, okay. Actually, Briscoe Group. We'll start with them. They did their first quarter result. For their sales, and they were up, I think, 11%,
right,
which is quite strong. And that was both in the housewares and in their sporting goods. However, despite this,
the sporting group, that's Rebel. The sporting goods is Rebel Sport, isn't it?
Yeah, Rebel
Sport. So this is Rod Duke owns all. Is he the? So it's Briscoes and Rebel are the same, right? Okay.
Yeah, he owns them.
Yeah.
And anyways, their sporting goods, are also very strong. But Rod's a funny guy, and he said, well, it could have been better if we didn't have the low value of the New Zealand dollar hitting their imports and the wheat dairy prices. That's had an impact, believe it or not. And of course, there was the weather. This wonderful long summer we've been enjoying has really put a damper on winter sales. So, yeah, those things were a bit of an impact. But still, it was a pretty good first quarter sales number. And on Comvita, well, gee, their profit rose 68%.
Wow.
Yeah, it was hardly... and that's because, believe it or not, it's the Australian market that's outperforming. And what's driving that? But tourists from Asia, primarily Chinese, buying up their products there and taking them home.
So they're buying Comvita products in Australia and taking them back to... Taking them home with them.
Exactly, yeah. So they're doing really well.
Okay, what else are you going to tell us about tonight?
We had so many things, but look, I have to tell you, the highlight of my afternoon was talking to the Honourable Ruth Richardson, who's just stepped down as retiring actually, as the chair of Jade Software after 20 years. Very interesting to talk to her. I had a long conversation, 14 minutes, but I have a little bit of what she had to say about, innovation and productivity. Now, we've had some reports recently that says that New Zealand's productivity is lagging behind the rest of our, competitors, and that our innovation, again, we're having some issues with not enough investment in research and development. What's all behind this? She said the real rock stars in our economy are the farmers, but they're being disadvantaged. And I have some of our interview, if we can just have a listen to it.
The productivity puzzle is a really big one. I think some of the very big players in the New Zealand economy are underperformers. The rock stars of this economy are our farmers. Why is it that so much of their precious output is just tipped into a commodity bin and sold on a commodity market? So I think a good deal about the puzzle, which is New Zealand should be punching 40% above our current weight. Why we're not doing that? I think we've got business models and business structures that, militate against that, and I think we need to have a big reset of some of those business structures.
Well, she's having a crack at Fonterra there.
Yeah, well, it does sound.
A little, yeah.
Yeah, she's also on the Synlait board. Which is
right. Okay.
Which is
okay.
Okay. So she's in the dairy sector anyway.
Yeah.
But look, let's give her credit. She actually is on the board of some very innovative companies. Synlait being one. They've been doing really well with their infant formula, and they have customers like A2 Milk, which is a rock star all in itself, and other companies. The Merino Company of New Zealand. She's on the board of that. A number of others.
Companies that are adding value and doing more than just big dump commodity work, right?
Right.
Okay.
What
are the markets do?
Okay, so on the markets, we ended up about 1/3%. That's the NZ Top 50. That's our companies. By 24 points to 6,909. Our New Zealand dollar was trading at 67.4 US cents. A little bit down, but that's nothing to do with us. It's all about the Japanese and the Americans. And 92 cents Australian.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. Nona, appreciate you joining us. Tomorrow morning, the Australian company APN News and Media holds its AGM in Sydney. This will be big. Most of those meetings tend to pass by without much comment on this side of the ditch, but not this time. APN owns NZME, the company which publishes the New Zealand Herald, several daily newspapers in the North Island, and national radio networks including Radio Sport, ZM and News Talk ZB. So they're big players, and there's been a lot of speculation that APN will make a move tomorrow which could have a profound effect on the shape of New Zealand's news media. This will potentially, if the speculation is right, affect us all. Colin Peacock from RNZ's Media Watch has been having a look at this.
The rumour mill began to turn on Monday when the national newspaper The Australian reported that APN News and Media might announce a demerger of NZME. Not long after that, APN notified the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX, that a material announcement was imminent and trading in APN shares halted immediately. The Australian also reported that the other big Australian-owned player in publishing here, Fairfax Media, is also considering spinning off its New Zealand business. The paper said it could then be bought by another company, offered to investors, or listed on the NZX. Now that too would be a big deal, as Fairfax Media in New Zealand owns more newspapers here than any other company. It also has magazines and the country's most visited news website, stuff.co.nz. The two new entities would then have the option of merging, and the Australian newspaper also said that in the past, Fairfax and APN have held talks about that possibility. If that happens, it would turn two current rivals here into one single news organisation. But Fairfax would only say on Monday it was exploring options, and no decisions had been taken which should be disclosed to the ASX. The Fairfax spin-off then may not happen soon or at all, but the Australian does seem to know what goes on at its rival Fairfax. Last month it reported that Fairfax was thinking about scrapping the printing of its big city papers on weekdays. Fairfax denied it then, but confirmed last week it has weighed up the option after all. In the background to all this are changes in media ownership rules in Australia. Media companies are shaping up to invest in other ones there, as investment analyst Victoria Harris from Milford Asset Management told RNZ today.
They're weighing up what to keep and what to divest, what else to buy, what else is available, keep their top performing assets and trying to get rid of ones that are potentially challenged or struggling.
And challenged and struggling sums up the newspapers on both sides of the Tasman right now. Fairfax Media's once profitable papers in Australia are losing money, and it doesn't have a big stake in broadcasters to bring in revenue. Meanwhile, APN is carrying more than 450 million Australian dollars of debt. New Zealand media outlets are simply not core assets anymore, according to Stephen Mayne, a Melbourne-based publisher who buys tiny shareholdings in major media companies so he can attend corporate meetings and ask them awkward questions.
It's an industry in structural decline. The advertising rates on websites have also collapsed because of the likes of Facebook and Google. You know, you've got to take cost out, but this is a company which has decided to exit newspapers everywhere in Australia and New Zealand.
What's been touted as a mega media merger in New Zealand would mean that both companies would no longer have to compete with each other for shrinking advertising income whilst also cutting costs. Some newspapers would almost certainly close, and hundreds of journalists and backroom people would lose their jobs. A smaller staff of journalists reporting national news would then be competing only with reporters from the broadcasters. A single company would dominate the market everywhere other than the Lower South Island, and the Commerce Commission could decide that that's anti-competitive. However, backers of a merger could also argue that in the converged digital media environment that they're finding so tough right now, there will still be competition. They'll be up against TVNZ, MediaWorks and Sky TV for advertising and an online audience, and the internet giants Facebook and Google are taking the bulk of online advertising income away from all of them. New Zealand's biggest commercial media companies have already created a joint advertising agency to fight back against that. The bosses at NZME and Fairfax Media may have already decided they're stronger together than apart. For Checkpoint, Colin Peacock.
Yes, Colin, making it feel a little bit like Sunday morning, as Lou says, bacon and eggs. When Colin speaks. Anyway, we will have more on this tomorrow, and if what Colin predicted is true, obviously Media Watch will cover it this Sunday. The environmentalist and academic Dame Anne Salmond is calling for a Waterways Commission to urgently take charge of the country's water. She's warning that without action now, New Zealand's waterways could become killers. Dame Anne's call is backed by the Māori Council, but farmers and at least one environment group say it won't work. Sharon Brett Kelly's been looking at this.
Dame Anne says people fear they are losing control of water to private interests, and more lakes and rivers are becoming dangerously toxic.
You've got lakes like Lake Forsyth down south, which is so toxic that it's killing sheep and dogs. And that's a kind of signpost of the kind of future we might be heading.
She says the battle over water has become so contentious that iwi, farmers, clean water campaigners and other groups need to find common ground.
We need a solution that gives everybody a stake and a way of seeing that everybody benefits.
Dame Anne is advocating for an independently run Waterways Commission funded by user charges on commercial entities like bottled water and irrigation companies. She says the challenge is to ensure water does not turn into a commodity where the profits flow into the pockets of a few. And she says communities need help to restore and care for their waterways before it's too late.
If we kill off our waterways, that's a very dangerous thing to do to our economy, to our society. It's not just about being able to swim in the waterways. It's having, lakes and rivers and estuaries and streams and springs that don't kill.
The Māori Council Chair, Sir Eddie Jury, says water is the biggest problem facing Māori.
We're dealing with a resource that is becoming a worldwide scarce resource, and we are setting a pattern now that will affect future generations. It is the last frontier, if you like, in our resource development programs.
Sir Eddie says a Waterways Commission is a good idea and could be modelled on the fisheries quota management system set up about 30 years ago.
This body is tasked with ensuring what sort of flow must be maintained to ensure that we end up with water bodies that provide for local fisheries and which is swimmable, not wadeable, and which can ensure that there is free water for domestic purposes, and then looking at what is the balance that may be used commercially.
But farmers say a commission wouldn't work. Federated Farmers Water spokesman Chris Allen says generations of governments have done nothing about water and it should be left to communities who understand their waterways.
There's iwi interests, there's local communities, whether you be a farmer, an irrigator, a ski field operator. Everyone wants to have a say in their water, and taking that away from them and moving it to Wellington just doesn't fulfil all those things about collaborative governance of water.
Chris Allen says people have become too emotional about the extent of the pollution and the commercial take by water companies.
How much money are they making? How much water are they taking? That to me, it's quite a contentious question as to what are we actually dealing with. How much water is actually being sold? From what I'm aware, there's about 6 or 8 relatively small consents compared to some of the other takes that go on around the place. I'm not supportive of that approach at the moment, but however, how big is the problem?
The Water Rights Trust in Canterbury has been battling for more than 16 years to preserve lowland freshwater streams threatened by the rapid growth in farming. Trustee Roger Young says so far it's losing the fight, but he doesn't think a Waterways Commission is the solution.
Look, on the surface it seems like a good idea because there does need to be something to break the impasse. I guess our concern would be that a commission would lead to even more delays. We've had an experience in Canterbury of collaborative consultations and that frankly hasn't worked.
Roger Young says a moratorium on further farming intensification and irrigation would be a better solution. Dame Anne Sarmon says New Zealanders will become extremely angry if waterways that belong to everybody are captured in the interests of a few. Doing nothing, she says, is not an option. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
12 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is planning a visit to Fort McMurray, the Western Canadian city, of course, that's been ravaged by wildfires, to witness the devastation firsthand. Officials now believe up to 90% of the city's buildings may have escaped damage, which does seem incredible in the circumstances, and residents may soon be able to begin returning home. Vanessa Johnson reports.
In the oil sands boomtown of Fort McMurray, Alberta, scenes of utter devastation following days of wildfires, with blocks of homes reduced to rubble. But on Monday's tour by Canadian officials, many were also encouraged by how much was spared, an estimated 90% of the city's buildings. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he plans to see it for himself.
I am in close contact with the Premier of Alberta, looking for an appropriate time for me to come visit Fort McMurray, and we're hoping to be able to announce that in the coming days.
He's also vowed a multi-year commitment by the national government to rebuild the area. Meanwhile, evacuees are camping out at various shelters outside of Fort McMurray. Julia Susi says she appreciates the aid, but is also anxious to get back home.
The help has been amazing, being able to come to places like this, get the diapers, the formula that you need. We don't know how long we're going to be gone for.
As firefighters battling the blaze finally catch a break in the weather, with cooler temperatures and reduced winds, residents are hoping it won't be much longer.
Sports news now, which is sort of slightly breaking news at 10 to 6. 2 of the 5 Warriors players suspended for mixing medication and energy drinks 2 weeks ago have been recalled to the National Rugby League side. Ben Matalino and Bodine Thompson have earned a recall following the suspension. Other players haven't. Matt Chatterton, Conrad Hurrell, he's not back.
No.
Right, let's talk about...
He never actually admitted to taking the concoction. Then you've got the likes of Manu Vatuvei, and you've also got Sam Lassoni and Albert Vetti. They haven't earned a recall. Vatuvei only just re-entered the squad yesterday with the team. He had been placed on medical leave following this announcement that they had been suspended.
Any further details about what that medical leave was about?
The Warriors haven't gone into details.
Okay.
There's been a lot of speculation, but there has been no hard sort of evidence as to why.
So Manu Vatuvei is not back. Sam Lassoni is not back.
No, neither is Albert Vetti. So,
okay, why not? Why are the other two not back?
Well, I suppose you could argue that Ben Matalino and Bodine Thompson have, they are big enforcers in the Warriors, and Ben Matalino is a 3-time or 2-time Warriors of the Year. He's a very, very good player for the Warriors, and they're missing the likes of Simon Mannering at the moment, so they need that experience in their forward pack. And Bodine Thompson has been quite a consistent back rower for the Warriors. So whereas Albert Vetti and Sam Lassoni, they are sort of fringe or bench players, so it's no real surprise, and Manu not much of a surprise considering he only re-entered the camp yesterday.
How's the team culture?
Team culture, good question.
It's leading to an announcement around Sir Graham Henry, right?
Yes.
So Sir Graham Henry, so if you're listening and you're not a sports fan, Sir Graham Henry coached the All Blacks to the Rugby World Cup
in 2011.
In 2011. So, and he's never, as far as I'm aware, done any league coaching before. He may have missed something, but he's a hardcore union man, isn't he?
Oh, he is, but he's been giving help to fellow coaches in rugby union before he went and helped out as a director over in Argentina, helping the Argentinian team. And he has been just providing general help as a coach to various coaching clinics around the country. So he is very sought after.
He's going to the Warriors camp.
Yes, he and Andrew McFadden have been in contact over the past 18 months. They've had general conversations. They get along very well together, and Sir Graham Henry has a lot of time for McFadden. He likes what he's sort of doing in regards to discipline and professionalism at the Warriors, and Andrew McFadden asked Jim Doyle to, get this mentor. He wanted a mentor to sort of help him, guide him, because Andrew McFadden hadn't been a head coach of an NRL team before he was given the job when Matthew Elliott was sacked. So he really wanted that help. He tried calling on a former teammate, Laurie Daly, who was the New South Wales coach of the State of Origin, but Laurie couldn't quite commit to it because he obviously was based in Australia. So having someone on the ground here in New Zealand, in Auckland, at Mount Smart Stadium is what Andrew McFadden really wanted, and that's what he's got.
Great coach, Graham Henry. And I mean, he had a wonderful capacity to bring out the best in players, as the Black Jersey did too. But look at Ma'a Nonu, how brilliant he was as an All Black.
Exactly.
When he was sometimes struggling at Super 15 level.
Yeah, when he was going through that period with the Blues and the Highlanders.
That's right.
Yeah.
Excellent, Matt Chatterton, thank you. So breaking news, 2 of those boys back, Ben Matalino and Bodine Thompson, are back with the Warriors.
They are playing the Penrith Panthers this Saturday in Christchurch.
Matt Chatterton, thank you very much indeed. We are going to, thanks Matt, we're going to give you some feedback now on that interview with Andrew Jud. Sometimes something happens on Checkpoint and you just get so much feedback that's extraordinary. So we're just going to rip through a sample of it, thanking you all. Andrew Jud is so correct, and it's so refreshing to hear his experiences. Yes, I am clapping. I'm also a recovering racist. New Zealand is a racist country. Mr Judd deserves a knighthood. Cheers, Ken Halliday. Good stuff, Andrew, from another concerned Pākehā. What a fantastic and brave man Andrew Judd is, says Brian Marsh. How wonderful of him to share his story and be so open and honest about his past, where he comes from, and how he has found himself in the present. I can only applaud his honesty and hope that it opens the way for more New Zealanders to reflect on the kinds of things they say and think. A fantastic role model for us all. Congratulations, Mayor of New Plymouth. You're an inspiration we all need in this ugly, divided world. Not clapping, crying, John. What a wonderful man. Andrew Jud for PM. Overwhelmingly, the feedback was expressing support with Andrew Jud. A couple of people were a bit critical, and one said, Mr. Jud, just because you're a recovering racist, please do not attempt to pass your guilt trip onto others. Keep it to yourself. On to the streets of Auckland now, with the time coming up to 5 to 6. Auckland Council is suggesting spot fining beggars for misbehaving in the city streets, but first they'll have to beg the government for the power to do it. Figures show that over the past 6 months there's been an average of 466 incidents each month where beggars have breached the public safety and nuisance bylaw. Carla Pember went along to the Council's regulatory bylaw committee hearing today.
The latest figures reveal 2 of the city's beggars have in the past 2 years alone breached the controversial bylaw almost 400 times. There have been 350 to 640 breaches each month since September, with most offenders getting a verbal warning. The police have been called 65 times. The council today proposed 4 ways to tackle the problem, including reviewing or changing the public safety and nuisance bylaw and asking the government for the power to spot fine beggars. The manager of bylaws and compliance, Max Wild, says the rules as they stand don't give the council enough power.
If we were to in the future pursue a ban of begging, we would still not have that power to pursue infringement fines.
Councillor George Wood says although aggressive and intimidating behaviour from beggars has dropped off, the problem's not over.
It's taking us forever to get these matters before the district court. 30 days or that length of period before we can get a hearing, it's crazy. So we want the ability to be able to issue infringements, and some of these people are obviously making quite good money so they can pay those infringements.
Mr Wood says the current bylaw needs more teeth but shouldn't go too far.
Having a draconian regime probably is not going to see the problem go away. I know in Melbourne where they actually have the ability to arrest these people and take them to court. I think the penalty is 12 months imprisonment, a $20,000 fine maximum, something like that, which is a totally different concept to what we have here in Auckland, where these people have to be dealt with by way of summons and then taken to court. But in Melbourne, the problem hasn't gone away. It's still there.
Heart of the City wants begging to simply be banned. Its chief executive, Viv Beck, says the bylaw is just managing the problem when it needs to solve it.
It does need to acknowledge that people in need help. Once we have worked through what that help is, I think you've then got a scenario that says, well, what do we want for our city streets? What do we want for our reputation as a city?
Viv Beck says being able to fine beggars would help. A review of the bylaw will be carried out sometime in the next few months. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Carla Penman.
A bit of escapist fun now. The first parcel delivery by drone could soon become a reality after DHL successfully completed a 3-month test of a parcel copter in Bavaria. Over 3 months, they did 130 deliveries, flying parcels containing medicine, sporting goods, you name it, within 8k of takeoff. DHL says the same journey would have taken 30 minutes plus by car. It took 8 minutes using the drone. Here's how it works, and if you can get to Freeview Channel 50 or live stream, this is worth a watch, but this is what happens.
The DHL Parcelcopter 3.0 has been technically refined, and in January 2016 celebrated its world premiere in Reit im Winkel in the Bavarian Alps. It is now a tilt-wing aerial vehicle and is able to start and land vertically. Flying fully autonomously, it achieves a distance of 8 kilometers and overcomes a difference of more than 480 meters in altitude. The Parcelcopter is being tested for express and emergency delivery in difficult-to-reach mountainous regions and offers end customers the opportunity to send and receive their parcels nationwide and around the clock. And this is due to the unique process integration into the DHL logistics chain. With the modified pack station, the DHL Skyport, end customers are able to hand over the parcel to the Parcelcopter. This through the world's first automated loading and discharge.
That was DHL. They got a drone to voice it, I think. Right. We've got 40 seconds until the news, so let's have some more of the extraordinary feedback that's coming in on Andrew Jud. Kudos to Andrew Jud for starting an important conversation. John, what an amazing mayor, a true leader with mana. We need to be more open and respectful with each other, but firstly understand our history as two people sharing one nation. Kia kaha, says Paul, and Jim says, I would move to Taranaki to vote for Andrew Jud if I could. So much feedback. Thank you for it all. It's really wonderful to hear from you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint with John Campbell and RNZ. It's wonderful to have you with us on behalf of all our team. Thank you for tuning in. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, a rich lister and a PR queen. Some of the New Zealanders whose names have appeared in the Panama Papers. The government agency running the controversial Compass contract for Dunedin hospital meals says it's begun auditing the company's performance. A call for the Wellington Council to commit to paying its staff a living wage. And 2 more sailors pack their bags for Rio. All of that and more coming up. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Only 3% of all property bought in New Zealand in the first 3 months of this year was purchased by people who are tax residents of overseas countries. Land Information New Zealand, LINZ, has revealed this after legislation passed last year required overseas buyers of New Zealand property to have an IRD number in this country. The Chief Executive of LINZ, Peter Mercy, says the data analysis gives some information about overseas interests, but he concedes it did not amount to a register of foreign ownership, as the 3% could include New Zealanders living abroad.
Essentially, of about 45,000 property transfers in that quarter, for 3% of those transfers, at least one of the parties associated with being a buyer had an overseas tax residency.
Peter Mercy says of the 3%, the largest number come from China, followed closely by Australia, with Britain third. Trust companies and businesses, which represent more than 10% of total sales, have not been counted in the data because LINZ found it too hard identifying the citizenship or residency status of the people behind them. The Prime Minister has hit back at criticism of his legal advisor Ken Whitney's connection to the Panama law firm Mossack Fonseca. The Panama Papers show that a trust of which Mr Whitney was a director owned 2 Mossack Fonseca companies registered in the British Virgin Islands. Here's our political reporter May Heron.
John Key says he doesn't consider Ken Whitney to be connected to Mossack Fonseca, and New Zealanders won't be concerned about such tenuous associations. He says when it comes to tenuous links, even Greenpeace International is revealed as a beneficiary of one of the trusts. Mr Key says Inland Revenue has found fewer than 200 New Zealand-based trusts in the Panama Papers database, and they've all been disclosed to the IRD. However, the Prime Minister's office acknowledges this conclusion is based on just an initial scan. The international organisations Amnesty and Red Cross also feature in the database linked to fundraising trusts. From Parliament, May Heron.
Meanwhile, at least 36 Americans accused of fraud or financial misconduct are linked to offshore companies in the Panama Papers. Our US correspondent Patrice Howard reports.
The data released shows that among Mossack Fonseca's clients is Len Galchuk, a former U.S. professional football player who has been accused of fraud and racketeering. He is just one of nearly 40 American businessmen tied to the firm, which has denied publicly using offshore businesses for tax evasion, money laundering, terrorist finance, or other illicit purposes. Patrice Howard, RNZ News, Los Angeles.
The historian Anne Salmond is calling for a Waterways Commission to urgently take charge of the country's water. She says people fear they're losing control of water to private interests and that more waterways are becoming dangerously toxic. Dame Anne says an independently run Waterways Commission could be funded by user charges on commercial entities like bottled water companies, and the money could be used to help communities to restore and care for the waterways before it's too late.
If we kill off our waterways, that's a very dangerous thing to do to our economy, to our society. It's not just about being able to swim in the waterways. It's having, lakes and rivers and estuaries and streams and springs that don't kill.
And Salmond. Farmers and at least one environment group say a Waterways Commission is not the answer and communities should be left to manage their own water. Auckland households look set for their lowest rates rise in 5 years, 2.6%. The Auckland Council meets on Friday to consider next year's budget, with rates overall expected to go up by 2.4%. The budget includes extra money to continue the free afternoon public transport concession for Super Gold cardholders after the government withdraws its subsidy in Auckland. The overall rates rise proposed is the lowest since the council was formed 5 years ago, with increases trending downwards from an initial 3.9%. Witnesses at a court-martial have painted a blurry picture of a night out in Palmerston North that ended in a group of soldiers being taken into police custody and some of them throwing themselves at the walls of their cell. Two soldiers, Lance Corporal Joshua Mapson and Private Barclay Bishop, are charged with prejudicing service discipline by taking the psychoactive drug N-bomb. All of the 5 witnesses called before the court say they were drinking heavily and 4 consumed the drug. Those who took it can remember going to town, but none can remember taking the drug or the effect it had on them. The 2 accused soldiers have pleaded not guilty, with their lawyers saying their drinks were spiked. In sport, Warriors players Ben Matulino and Bowden Thompson have been recalled to the NRL side for this weekend's game against the Penrith Panthers following their suspension for mixing medication and energy drinks. However, Manu Vatavai and Sam Lisoni and Albert Vete, who were suspended for the same reason, haven't been recalled despite rejoining the training squad. Playmakers Toimoala Lolohea and Thomas Luluai have also returned from injury. Meanwhile, Sir Graham Henry has joined the Warriors coaching staff and will mentor coach Andrew McFadden over the next month. The New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker is adamant he'll be victorious in his upcoming IBF eliminator fight against Carlos Takam. Takam is the most experienced boxer the undefeated Parker has come up against, but he believes his hand speed will be too quick for Takam.
We've trained the house down for this fight. I've put in 100%, Kevin's put in 100%, now my whole team's put in 100%. We've trained very hard and we're very excited about this challenge.
Joseph Parker. The 520 general admission tickets for the fight are being sold on Trade Me with a $1 reserve. The winner of the bout will face Britain's Anthony Joshua, the current holder of the IBF heavyweight title. The Māori All Blacks will play the Irish side Munster in Limerick as part of their Northern Tour in November. That game is scheduled a week after they play the USA Eagles in Chicago. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the blind odysseys of Julie Woods. Of course, she can't tell us much about what she saw, but she's got the taste, sounds and smells well covered. We have a window on the world of human rights. Could cultural relativism ever justify slavery? And this week's pundit Dylan Mayhew discusses the mathematics of Srinivasa Ramanujan, the man who knew infinity, at least according to a movie made about him recently, on Nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there's a severe weather warning in force for many areas for northwest gales and heavy rain. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered rain developing in Northland tonight, then spreading south tomorrow morning, becoming widespread later. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud with scattered rain developing from Whanganui southwards tomorrow evening and elsewhere later. Waikato to Taranaki, also Bay of Plenty, the central high country, Kapiti and Wellington, mostly cloudy, drizzle developing tonight or overnight, turning to rain by tomorrow evening, possibly heavy, especially about the ranges. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy, rain tomorrow, heavy in Bulla and northwest Nelson. Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy, scattered rain at times, but remaining mostly dry about the coast and plains of Canterbury, gale or severe gale northwesterlies, and long fine spells for the Chatham Islands. It is coming up to 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Coming up, audit on Compass Meals in Dunedin. But first, a woman dubbed as one of Auckland's most influential people has emerged in the tangled web of the Panamanian tax haven papers. Deborah Pead, who heads Pead PR, has been named in the Panama Papers as the beneficial owner of 3 companies set up by Mossack Fonseca in the British Virgin Islands. She says her name's only emerged because she was doing a favour for a sick friend. But who is the woman who was recently described as possibly being the most influential in the country's biggest city? Sharon Brett Kelly has been taking a look.
PPR's showreel flashes big brands like L'Oreal, Samsung and Microsoft. It handled the promotion of Heineken as the Rugby World Cup sponsor and the FIFA Under-20 World Cup. Deborah Pead's team of 25 write blogs, make videos, organise events and social media and press coverage to help companies build their brands. The extent of her influence can be seen on PPR's own YouTube channel, featuring the launch of new glass technology where the Prime Minister John Key cuts the ribbon.
We are a couple of small islands as a country at the bottom of the world. No one owes us a living, and if we're going to go into the big wide world and be successful, then we have to go there with a point of difference. We have to be better than
Deborah Pead's PR career began in South Africa, where she started her own consultancy in 1987. She sold her interests to immigrate here in 1996, setting up the PR division of the ad agency Bates in Auckland before quitting to head up Pead PR. Her firm was behind the high-profile campaign fighting Port of Auckland's expansion. It also helps businesses develop corporate social responsibility strategies, and it supports the charity trust Rokatori Music Therapy Centre. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
Well, our business editor, Giles Beckford, is one of the joint RNZ One News team that's been given access to these papers, along with investigative journalist Nikki Hager. He's been through the papers involving Deborah Pead, and he joins us now live from Wellington. Hi, Giles. How does her name pop up?
Well, we saw her name, John, in a spreadsheet amongst the papers that we were going through. It was a spreadsheet of connections to New Zealand trusts and companies. We followed the electronic trail on this one, and it involved a British investment company called Chesterfield Group. Now, they're a company that specialises in advising people around the world how to manage their wealth, their investments, their businesses, and it finds the most appropriate structures for those people. And it puts a lot of business the way of Mossack Fonseca, and that's how Deborah Pead's name came into conjunction with them.
OK, what do you know? What is Deborah Pead saying about the circumstances that she has these Mossack Fonseca trusts?
Well, Mossack Fonseca did its standard practice. It set up 3 companies, in this case, DAC Company Group, DAC Management Services and DAC Company Services. They were all incorporated in the British Virgin Islands, which is a well-known tax haven, in late September 2014. Now, each company had a nominal capital of $50,000 US. That's about 73,000 New Zealand dollars at the current exchange rates. And the money was said to be coming from business profits, and the companies were said to be conducting their business in the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. Now, we put all these issues to Deborah Pead today, and she said, yes, I was involved with the DAC companies, but I was doing it, I was helping a friend. And the stories that she's told us is that she was effectively acting as a protector of the assets of a friend in South Africa who was going through a rather challenging time. And so she was doing this as a good deed, in effect. She said she only dealt with Chesterfields. She didn't know of any Mossack Fonseca links, nor did she know where the assets were stored or what they were put to. And she says the companies are now defunct because her friend needed the funds and has repatriated them and used them in South Africa. So in this case, a clear explanation as to her involvement.
OK, Deborah Pead, not the only Kiwi to turn up in the Panama Papers today. The stuff you've been going through?
No, the name of Richard Chandler, who is one of the a pretty well-known Kiwi billionaire based in Singapore now, but he set up a couple of companies in the Bahamas in 2012. He declined, or his company declined, to make any comment to us about why they had done that. The late Alan Hubbard, you remember, of South Canterbury Finance.
Yeah.
Well, he is shown along with his wife Margaret among 80 shareholders in the South American Ferro Metals Company, which was registered by Mossack Fonseca in the British Virgin Islands. Clearly, we can't ask any more details there, and there are no details in the papers about that. And one that's emerged quite late in the day is Forbes Elworthy, son of the late Peter Elworthy of Federated Farmers. He was a donor to the Green Party in 2011, and he's named on the database for his links to a Singapore-based trust. So clearly, a lot of names there. We're still sifting through them, and no more. Others will emerge in due course.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you very much indeed, Giles. Giles is one of the RNZ One News team working with Nikki Hager, who have access to the documents there in Wellington. The government agency running the controversial Compass contract for Dunedin Hospital meals says it's begun auditing the company's performance. Complaints continue from patients and now junior doctors about the quality of meals at 3 hospitals in Otago and Southland since Compass took over fully in February. And as our Otago reporter Ian Telford discovered, there are no minimum standards for meal nutrition either, and that's something at least one DHB wants fixed.
Just a few months into a 15-year contract, the Compass deal to supply food to New Zealand DHBs has highlighted a lack of national standards for the quality and content of hospital meals. Wendy Dodunsky from the Waikato District Health Board, which is winning praise for its meals, says it had to write its own nutritional standards based on Australian ones.
It would be great if we had standards that were owned by the Ministry of Health, so that they were New Zealand hospital standards. At the moment, there's not an official New Zealand standard.
Wendy Dodunsky says the DHB checks its meals meet its own standards, but they're not audited by the government. Compass provides meals to 9 DHBs, including Southern, Auckland, Waitemata, Counties Manukau, Hawera, Tairāwhiti and Nelson Marlborough. In a step forward, part of the deal includes a requirement to meet nutrition standards, which include energy and vitamins, but also aspects like taste and texture. But the new standards don't cover its competitor Spotless, nor the 3 DHBs which prepare meals in-house like Waikato. Wendy Dodunsky says that should change.
I would really like to see a national standard so that whoever is providing the food has a standard that the public can be confident about is provided in all hospitals.
A comparison of Compass's proposals against existing DHB hospital meals found none fully met the standard, and many fell short on fibre and protein. The agency running the Compass contract, Health Partnerships, is reluctant to release the Compass standards, saying they're commercially sensitive. It also refused repeated requests for an interview. But it has revealed today it began monitoring Compass against about a dozen performance indicators in its contract last month, and expects the first results soon. It says the indicators include food safety, patient and staff satisfaction, and the accuracy of orders, and that includes Meals on Wheels. It's also begun work on a full auditing system for Compass's meals that will include nutrition. An Otago University human nutrition professor, Jim Mann, agrees there should be national standards. Even so, he says Compass's meals probably meet nutritional standards fine, but there's a bigger problem.
What tends to happen is if the food is not palatable, then people don't eat it. So as a nutritionist, I think the real concern is as much in terms of the quality of the food preparation as it is in the content of the food. Because, as I've said, if you don't eat the food, you don't get the nutrients.
The Southern DHB says it's not had any complaints about meal nutrition, but mainly about the look and taste. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Let's head from Dunedin to Wellington. A group calling for all Wellington City Council workers to earn the living wage so the money needed can be taken off top earning staff. Living Wage Wellington made a submission at the annual planning meeting today, calling on the council to commit to becoming an accredited living wage employer. This has been much discussed, including here in Auckland, but the discussion hasn't always led to implementation. Tiana Barnes was at the meeting.
A city council contractor, Tassi Lassi, spends 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, cleaning public toilets and other facilities around Wellington. The father of 3 is being paid the minimum wage of $15.25 an hour to make ends meet for his family. He says getting the living wage would mean he could take another day off to spend time with his family.
It's not enough money for support my family for everything. We need some time for my family. We need another day off. I want to take a day off for my family too.
The council is already paying the living wage to staff, paying a minimum of $18.55 an hour. It planned to extend this to its security guards as well, but the Chamber of Commerce threatened legal action, saying it was unlawful. A decision has yet to be made on this. The Living Wage Wellington spokesperson, Paul Barber, says the living wage has now increased to $19.80 per hour, and it should be extended to contractors as well.
What we're asking them to is to continue that good work, to extend that work and to ensure that cleaners, people like cleaners and security workers can also access a living wage.
He says the increase would make a big difference for people being paid the minimum wage.
We've already seen for the hundreds of workers who have had their wages lifted that what a difference it makes for them, perspective it gives, that you have, instead of just scraping by to survive, that you actually have enough to really participate. You can have some time for your family, you can have some time to actually plan and budget and prepare for the future.
Paul Barber says the money required to increase the living wage could comfortably be taken out of the salary increases of the 22 council staff paid more than $180,000 a year. Living Wage Wellington also suggests a pay cap that could be rolled out over the next 3 years and the introduction of an 8-to-1 ratio of highest to lowest paid over the next 5 to 10 years. This would result on the highest pay for an employee being $330,000 on the current 1980 living wage rate. But the Deputy Mayor and Chair of the Governance and Finance Committee, Justin Lester, says he won't cut rates from the top.
I don't want to compensate at the lower end by cutting rates at the top end. I want to respect the jobs that everyone does. But at the same time, I want to make sure that gap isn't as large, and I think that those at the lower end, we should respect the job they do and they should be remunerated sufficiently.
City Councillor Paul Eagle says it is something the council should consider.
That would be one of the decisions that councillors could make. I don't think that would impact us in terms of attracting the right people. That's an argument that some have presented. What this would be about is a fair way of distributing a fixed pool of money.
The council will vote on the submission in June. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Tiana Barnes.
Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves, which is just under 9 minutes away. A man who threatened to kill his own children becomes the president-elect of the Philippines. And counter civil rights lawsuits in America over transgender toilets. All of that coming up in 8.5 minutes. We've got a bit of foreign news first, though. A very nasty US presidential campaign is looming potentially, with the opening shots already fired. While Donald Trump has no challenges for the Republican nomination left, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are still battling it out for the Democrats, and both are focused on Nebraska and West Virginia primaries. They are coming up. We'll cover them. But that hasn't stopped Mr. Trump already going on the attack against whom he expects to win the Democratic nomination, Hillary Clinton. Our Washington correspondent Priscilla Huff reports.
There are dumpster fires, that is trash fires, which are more popular than the two people likely to run for the White House. That is the widely shared summary of one Republican senator, Ben Sasse of Nebraska. It's particularly interesting because he's been rumored to be a top pick to make a third-party run for the White House at a time when the political situation in the United States is like nothing anyone's ever seen before. The majority of American voters dislike Hillary Clinton, and even more dislike Donald Trump. Likely Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton told the CBS News program Face the Nation what she wants to do.
I'm not going to run an ugly race. I am going to run a race based on issues and what my agenda is for the American people.
But she's not likely to have that opportunity, not after what Donald Trump said in Spokane, Washington.
She's married to a man, and nobody, perhaps in the history of politics, was worse to women or abused women more than Bill Clinton.
He's attacking early and personally, and he's also turning Republican policy on its head. Republicans usually campaign on lower taxes and smaller government. That is not what Donald Trump said to NBC News' Meet the Press program.
For the wealthy, I think, frankly, it's going to go up. And you know what? It really should go up.
The Republican establishment, including former U.S. President George W. Bush, has turned their backs on Donald Trump. And after Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives Paul Ryan said he's not ready to support Donald Trump, Trump's surrogate, former U.S. vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin, promised to CNN's State of the Union show Speaker Ryan's days in office are numbered.
Paul Ryan is soon to be cantored as an Eric Cantor. His political career is over, but for a miracle, because he has so disrespected the will of the people.
To explain, former Republican Majority Leader Eric Cantor lost his seat in a surprise loss in the last election cycle in 2014, a result that is now being seen as an example of how American politics is changing, but leaders were not paying attention. But when it comes to the looming national race, Hillary Clinton is trying to take the high road, as she said to the CBS News program Face the Nation.
I don't really feel like I'm running against Donald Trump. I feel like I'm running for my vision of what our country can be.
The problem for Hillary Clinton is that many American voters see Bernie Sanders as having a brighter, clearer, fresher vision. Voters in Nebraska and West Virginia will have their say in the next round of primaries. For Checkpoint, I'm Priscilla Huff in Washington.
6:24. 2 more sailors have come on board for the New Zealand Olympic team in Rio. Come on board, sorry. Josh Jr. has been selected in the fin class and Sam Meach in the laser class, bringing the sailing team to a total of 12 after the initial group was named in March. Jr. edged out Olympic veteran Andrew Murdoch, while Meach got the nod ahead of Andy Maloney for the only laser berth. Gosh, it's competitive. The 25-year-old junior missed out on the London Olympics 4 years ago when he quite literally outgrew the laser class. He told our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, on Skype that he's already been out to celebrate what will be his Olympic debut.
I went out with a few of my mates and had a bit of a big night, had a big dinner and a few drinks and just celebrated amongst some friends, so that was really nice. And yeah, huge sense of relief to have got the selection and, you know, just really stoked actually.
Your form over the past 12 months, you've really taken a step up, haven't you?
Yeah. Sort of this year I've managed to finish in the top 5 at every event, so, and even managed to win one, which is really cool. So that's really good leading into the Olympics. So just got to keep progressing in the same direction, and then, you know, see where things stand come the last day, and whether I can win a medal or not. So that's the goal.
How difficult has it been changing classes, because you were chasing a different class to get to London, weren't you? And you've switched in the interim.
Yeah. So in 2012 I switched classes, and the biggest difference is that this boat's bigger, so I had to put on about 15 or 20 kilos. You know, that's probably the biggest difference, and then you just have to learn how to sail the boat. So putting on the weight was the hardest part, but for me it wasn't too hard because I was already too big for the other class, so it was a natural progression for me to move into this. So
did that give you an opportunity to, you had to hit the gym or you had to hit the takeaway outlets?
Yeah, I'm more of the takeaway outlets kind of guy, but I have been doing gym as well.
A couple of regattas. Recently, you've been going into the last round. You've been sort of in a top 3 spot, then sort of dropped away a little bit. Is that something you're working on or concerned about?
Not too much at this stage. You know, I managed to finish off 2 regattas ago. I won, and I bet Giles Scott, who's the favourite. So it's the first time he's been beaten in 4 years. So I was the first person to do that, so I was pretty happy with that. But yeah, no, I just need to keep progressing and keep working on the areas that are weakest for me. And so, you know, if I step up in some of those areas, then I'll become more and more medal potential. So, you know, just keep working hard and see where things stand.
So has that win over Giles Scott made people sit up and take notice of you somewhat?
Yeah, I think I've always been on the radar, but that was definitely a big win. So I need to do it once more at a more important event come Rio.
How much development do you need to do? You mentioned you've got some areas you need to work on. What in particular do you look to develop between now and August?
Well, probably my biggest weakness is sort of the lighter air sailing, so when the wind is down quite light. So I'll continue to work on that, and it's mainly around just my technique in the boat and how I sail it and how I trim the sails and how I steer the boat through the water. So there's just a few things around that I could improve on and get a little bit faster.
And what impact does that have for Rio conditions there? What are you anticipating?
Rio's, it's going to be a bit tricky. It could get a little bit of anything, but it's likely to be sort of moderate winds for most of the event, and we might get one light day and one windy day. And, you know, we're expecting a lot of current in the water, a lot of tide, and some big waves. So it's going to be a really mixed event, and it's going to be an event that rewards someone who's a well-rounded sailor, not necessarily a specialist, so someone who's good across everything.
And you think being that all-round type of sailor, that's going to suit you, is it?
Yeah, that's going to suit me. Absolutely.
That's the Spirit Olympic sailor Josh Jr. talking to our sports editor Stephen Hewson. We're going to end tonight with a group of mostly refugee children from Syria and Afghanistan who've been stuck in refugee camps. But they've been given a tour of the Acropolis in Athens as part of Europe Day celebrations. Vanessa Johnson with this report.
It's Greece's most famous landmark. And on Monday, Europe Day, officials opened up the Acropolis to a group of 91 migrants from 2 government camps for a special tour.
Can we take a picture with you guys?
These migrants have legal status and many will soon continue their journey. But in the meantime, UNHCR spokesman Chris Boyan says it's a wonderful opportunity for the migrants to learn more about Europe.
What happened here today was really an exercise in civilization, a demonstration of what European values are about and where they were born.
Europe Day is an annual celebration of peace and unity on the continent, but this year the Greek government also wanted to raise awareness of Europe's migrant and refugee crisis. In Greece alone, some 54,000 migrants remain stranded, with most living at official reception centres or makeshift camps.
That brings Checkpoint to an end tonight. The interview with Andrew Jud is about to be posted online. So many people contacting us about that. Thank you all so much. We will tweet out the link or you can find it on the website. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5. See you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Panama Papers show Deborah Pead, the head of one of the most prominent Auckland public relations companies, is the beneficiary of trusts in a well-known tax haven. Only 3% of property bought in New Zealand in the first 3 months of this year was purchased by tax residents of overseas countries. The historian Anne Salmond is calling for a Waterways Commission to manage the country's water. And the agency running the Compass contract for Dunedin hospital meals says it's begun monitoring their quality. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, campaigning over Britain's membership of the EU, calls for help for a World Heritage Site, and a sophisticated